Dr. Karl Maret specializes in nutrition, functional medicine, and energy medicine at the Dove Center for Integrative Medicine in California. He holds master's degrees in both electrical engineering and biomedical engineering.
Well, I'm grateful to be at this conference today, and my hope is to give you an introduction to energy medicine, some of the beneficial ways in which we can use electromagnetic fields for health and wellness, as opposed to what we've been concentrating on this conference, which is more the health damaging effects of electromagnetic fields. My fundamental premise is that future of energy medicine will likely see a greater application of quantum physics to biology and chemistry and medicine. And this involves understanding the importance of quantum coherence of the water in our cells and tissues, the electrical nature of our body, and how these fields can be used for self-regulation and healing. Now, energy medicine is basically classified as that we can measure, which is called veritable energies, and that which we assume there are fields there, but we can't yet measure them. And those are called putative energies, and these include the understanding of chi or ki in Japan, or what in Ayurvedic medicine is called prana. These are yet to be explored, and often they're called subtle energies. There's, in fact, a report that just came out that you can get available for free here that shows many of the healing studies that are used in energy medicine and the human biofield, the field around the body. There are many useful texts on energy medicine. Here are some of the better ones for you to perhaps peruse. And also we have the new biophysics is trying to integrate the Eastern and Western concepts, and there's a great book on this that came out by Mayer and Mazzozzi. In addition to that, Paul Roche from the American Institute of Stress published or edited this particular book, which are peer-reviewed studies on this kind of field that came out in 2014. In addition, there are many institutions now doing research. As you can see, some prestigious universities and research institutions internationally are now quite interested in the human energy field, the biofield. Now, I'm going to concentrate on the quantum physics as applied to medicine and biophysics, and these are some of the pioneers, some of them I'll be talking about today. One of the earliest ones was Albert Szent-Györgyi. He won the Nobel Prize for discovering vitamin C, but he already proposed in 1941 the importance of electrons and protons inside the body and how this electricity was the foundation for the energetic processes in life. In fact, he published an article in Science in 1941 towards a new biochemistry that basically talked about these electrons and protons that form a continuum inside the body. We call that bioelectronics. Now, Harold Saxon Burr was another famous pioneer at Yale University. He measured the energy fields from the body, tried to find the electrical blueprint by using vacuum tube voltmeters with high impedance, and measured actual surface potentials on the body that correlated with appearance of cancer, ovulation in women, and so forth. Now, there are many healing frequencies that have been discovered using magnetometers, very sensitive magnetic field meters. Here you can see a listing of some of these, and this is an ongoing area of research. When we measure the emanations from the body, we can use these very sensitive coils or squids, superconductive quantum interference devices that measure minute magnetic fields emanated from the body. Now, one of the earliest clinical pioneers in this area as well was Björn Nordenström from the Karolinska Institute, who did some research and published his own book about this called Biologically Closed Electric Circuits. He was professor of diagnostic radiology in Sweden, and he treated cancers quite successfully and tried to interest Western medical doctors in this approach using direct current, the same as in the batteries in your cars and so on, to treat cancers in these closed biological circuits. Unfortunately, he wasn't too successful because chemotherapy and other approaches, radiation and so forth, were more commonly accepted. So this work went on to China a lot, where it's called galvanic current therapy, also called electrochemical therapy. The Chinese were very enthusiastic because this was inexpensive, very effective, minimally invasive, and they had a very large response. So it's also used a little bit in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, not much at all in the United States, but China, you want to really look at their work. It's quite extensive, over 10,000 patients studied using this effective approach. Now, we have to understand that tissues have different frequency responses to whether it's direct current or it's alternating current. At low frequencies, the electricity passes around the cells, and at higher frequencies, because of the tissue resistance or impedance, it goes right through the cells. And you can see some of these things here. So this is now being used as frequency specifics microcurrent, a millionth of an ampere passing through the body. It's very effective in pain management. Carolyn McMakin has actually written a textbook about it here. And when she did studies, you can see here the in fibromyalgia patients, the microcurrent treatments were as effective or more effective than drugs. Cytokines like interleukin-1 and 6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha and their pain scores rapidly decreased in just 3 treatments. These are usually very difficult treatment approaches in regular medicine and not very successful. Another pioneer was Robert Becker, an orthopedic surgeon who discovered a whole circulatory system in the body called the perineural system. Direct currents flow through the body when the body is injured, whether it's from breaking a bone or a tissue injury. And he also was interested in, can the body regenerate itself? And he would amputate, say, a limb of a salamander. And on the lower left here, you can see a biphasic response. First, there is a positive change in voltage and then a negative change as the limb regenerates. Now, this works in salamanders. It doesn't work in frogs or other amphibians necessarily, but it shows the electrical nature that's involved in tissue regeneration. This has been applied very successfully to non-union fractures. Andrew Bassett was a very early pioneer, and these are now used in bone stimulators, either inside the bones or around the bones where the current is induced to flow and heal the bones. Now, coming into this idea of water in the body and how the tissues behave, we have to understand how quantum physicists first got involved in this, and Herbert Froelich was one of the early pioneers. He was at the University of Liverpool after coming from Germany during the war, and he started to hypothesize and calculate that cells vibrate at very high frequencies, enzymes, tissue parameters, such as cell membranes, microtubules, and so on, all work in the communication area where we now also operate our telecommunications technologies that you heard about at this conference. Cyril Smith from the University of Salford in the UK was one of his collaborators, and he also did work with Bill Ray, the late Bill Ray, from Texas, who worked on electrically hypersensitive patients, the very thing we're talking about at this conference. And here is a slide that shows all the cell resonances that are calculated theoretically. And when you understand that the cell membrane, which we know has about a 70 to 100 millivolt charge or voltage across it, but it's only about 10 nanometers in width, there is a huge electrical field of about 10 million volts per meter across the field, and this is very important when we start understanding how cells organize the water inside of them. Dr. Smith also worked with Bill Ray, and they wrote one of the early articles, which you can still access here from 1991, showing that electromagnetic field sensitivity is a real thing. And here's a slide from Dr. Smith to show how they did the testing. He did some of the testing, at certain frequencies, when the patients were exposed to unique frequencies, they would often have a huge environmental reaction. They might go into literally a disabled state, even a catatonic state. At other frequencies, they would recover. And he was able to actually imprint water into test tubes that they could carry that helped them for a period of time with the good frequencies that would make them less susceptible to electromagnetic field exposure. Now, the key to this is cellular water, and we have to understand that all proteins exist in a hydrated state. Proteins, fats, even salts, of course, carbohydrates less, all have water around them, and this water forms a hydrogen bonding pattern that literally folds the three-dimensional conformation or structure of the proteins. And these bonds are very rapidly connecting and disconnecting. The water bridges inside the body literally vibrate at a terahertz frequency. That's a trillion cycles a second, as it were, at this process. And 99% of all the molecules in the body are water molecules. Of course, by weight, it's about 65 to 70%. And these water domains that are in phase from a quantum physics perspective are what make the cells so exquisitely sensitive to electromagnetic fields from the outside that I'm going to be talking about. So if we can visualize water particles when they start condensing, they start connecting to each other, and eventually inside the cell, they form these coherent domains that are about 100 nanometers in size, and they trap radiation in it, and they are what we call quantum coherent. All the phase of the vibrations of the molecule are like in sync. As a result of that, this makes the cells extremely sensitive to external magnetic fields. So this quantum electrodynamic approach, where all the coherent oscillations of the water molecules in the cell, which is about a third of the water, about 28% of the water in the cells is quantum coherent. And therefore, this also explains why water has these unusual properties, like its latent heat of vaporization, its boiling point, and so on. To see all the anomalies that water has, the key to that is understanding how it works from a quantum electrodynamic perspective. So what is the result of that? The properties of water is that it brings long-range order, not only between these small quantum coherent domains in the cells, but how they communicate with molecules, with other cells, and they also work by creating long-range communication between all the different cells in the body. So you can kind of see it on the picture on the right. All the cells are in phase, meaning they look like the waves, troughs and peaks are aligned. And this causes these water molecules to have a communication that is very effective, and it works through light in the body, through biophotons that I'll be discussing in a second. When the body loses this coherent water domains in the cells, the body gets sick and it starts to leak out the light, as we'll see. So if we think of these quantum coherent domains sort of being contained as sort of in this picture, then external electromagnetic waves can interact with the cells and create changes, oxidative stress markers, and so forth. So this is how the body communicates at a molecular level. And external fields can disturb that, as shown here. The vibration of the molecules is coordinated through these quantum coherent domains, but external fields therefore have a mechanism by which they disturb the healthy cellular equilibrium. Two physicists and students of this in Netherlands did an analysis of 724 studies, and they published this just this year. It's available for free, and they looked at all the different frequencies that were used to show healthy or unhealthy effects of different communication technologies. And when you octavize them down to a certain domain, you see that they're certain frequencies that are healthy, shown in green, and other ones that are very unhealthy. And so if we use the right frequencies, then perhaps we could help people in the communication technologies we use, instead of saying that all frequencies are bad, some might actually be healthy. Now, I talked about light in the cells. Fritz Popp, the late Fritz Popp, did quite a bit of research in Germany about these biophotons. They were originally discovered by Alexander Gurevich in 1924, in the 1920s in Russia. They called it mitogenic radiation. Nowadays, we call it ultra-weak emissions or biophotons. This work is ongoing in China and Russia and Germany, Israel. Not too much in the United States, but we're starting to look at this again as markers for health. In Kazakhstan, there was an interesting study. If you take two cell cultures, one with healthy cells and one with disease cells, and you look at the radiation coming in closed cell cultures through a window that allows ultraviolet to come through, a quartz window, then oftentimes the unhealthy cells can influence the healthy cell cultures to become diseased. So there's a communication process that takes place through light. Some of this is outlined in these books by Popp, Ho, and Warnke in Germany and England. So, in other words, the coherent domains in the water are part of the communication system that takes place through light inside the cells. And usually the cells don't leak that light because they use it to coordinate it. But when the cells get diseased, then we can pick this up through light emissions from the skin externally, and that's a sign of illness. If we remember that there's 100,000 chemical reactions that take place in the cell every second, and 1 million cells die every second in the body and quickly replaced, you can see that the chemical regulation of that is way too slow. This works much faster through light and through the mitochondrial electron transport chain and so forth, and therefore we can use lasers and light to influence that. The late Mae-Wan Ho wrote a wonderful book called The Rainbow and the Worm, the biophysics of living organisms, and she recognized that this structured water that she called liquid crystalline water is especially important from a quantum physics perspective. And if she looked at the bottom right there, you can see the larvae from fruit fly larvae. When you look under polarized light, they shimmer, showing the coherence when you use polarized light. And so this is very important. She also did studies with toroidal coils. Those are like donut-shaped coils with windings trapping the magnetic field inside, but the magnetic vector potential, which comes through the whole of the donut, as it were, is what really influences water and gives you the memory effect that water has through frequency modulation. Unfortunately, that was taken out of the modified Maxwell equations, and that's too long a topic to go into, but I just wanted to mention there is such a thing called an A field, or magnetic vector potential field, that does form the magnetic and electric field and is primary in quantum physics. Now, another pioneer was Nikola Tesla, creator, of course, Tesla coils and many devices. This was picked up by George Lakhovsky, a Russian immigrant working in Paris, and he developed a multi-wave oscillator based on Tesla coils that looked something like this. They were used for treating cancer very successfully in the 1930s, already in Paris hospitals and so on. And nowadays, there's many of these devices that are worthy of testing, but they really haven't had enough scientific study. But they use inert gases and other things around the Tesla coil. Another American that did a lot of work in Germany as well, studied at Heidelberg, and developed a microscope that unfortunately is not around, called the universal microscope. He could amplify the or magnify the cellular components and living organisms, bacteria, and so forth, and did a lot of studies with that and found at what specific frequencies these organisms would be destroyed. And nowadays, these are delivered through what's called inert gas tubes that are modulated at these frequencies, sending out a magnetic field into the environment. Recently, the Rife frequencies have begun to be reinvestigated for cancer, and you can see the references here for that. And there's books on Rife frequency lists that are available, used by a lot of different people. Unfortunately, because there's no economic advantage, none of these have been studied too well, although Rife did some work with Dr. Kendall from the University of Chicago at the time with viruses and bacteria. Now, bioelectromagnetic fields are frequency specific. They have a nonlinear dose-response curve. We think that the cell membrane is very important in the transduction here, and the body has its own endogenous electromagnetic field that is coordinated through the light that I mentioned, the biophotons. So at specific frequencies and at specific power levels, you get an effect, not necessarily at a higher power and not necessarily at a different frequency. All these different effects are frequency specific, which is why it's so difficult in the literature to find out if the same thing works all the time, and more power is not necessarily the better thing. These are very much resonance windows. So when we want to apply this electromagnetic fields to this whole process, it's very important to, I want you to remember these 8 major areas where we already talked about bone repair and nerve stimulation, wound healing and osteoarthritis, electroacupuncture and tissue regeneration, immune system stimulation, and cancer. These are all applications. And here's some examples. We're now starting to research tumor-specific frequencies and fields, typically in the low kilohertz range. They're usually using pulsing fields and so forth. And this is quite different than the direct current that I talked about by Dr. Nordenstrom earlier. These are alternating fields. Here's an example of mouse malignant melanoma cells treated at 100 kilohertz and works very effectively. There's the reference. Here's a whole number of different tumor treating fields that are being used for glioblastomas now, and these are common with, as we have found, with cell phone usage. There's more brain tumors and so on. So these are some of the positive ways in which you might interrupt the replication during metaphase and spindle formation of the cancer cells. Another thing that's been found recently is there are specific frequencies given off by the body by the tumors. And these frequencies are very tumor specific. And from this paper, you can see here a number of different tumors. They all have different frequency patterns, and these frequencies can be delivered to the body in order to get rid of the tumors in this way. And as the tumor grows, it actually puts out more frequencies. So it's a very exciting new field of research. Dr. Boris Pasche in North Carolina is doing work with that, and you can actually deliver these frequencies directly with an applicator under the tongue, so the whole body gets these frequency patterns given to them. Other approaches use pulsed electromagnetic field modalities. These are delivered in various coil formations or on mats. One has to use different pulse signals with changing amplitude and frequency patterns because the body otherwise accommodates to them. And here is 30 years of research, especially done in former Soviet bloc countries in Eastern Europe originally, but now actively also being researched here. And you can see the many applications of pulsed magnetic fields, or EMFs. In addition, we're starting to apply this to brain disorders. And because neuroplasticity is a big field, Norman Deutsch, who is a professor at University of Toronto, where I trained in medicine, wrote this book, The Brain's Way of Healing. That's already been translated into 19 languages, only published in 2015. And in it, he describes, for example, a device now being developed at University of Wisconsin, where all these electrodes are applied to the skin of the tongue, and they produce different frequencies in triplets. And this seems to really help the brain recover even chronic illnesses. So you can read about that in his book. And then finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about light and laser therapies that are very effective, another part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Here are some books that you can read about that give some real insight how they're being used. We, of course, have used blue light for a while to break down bilirubin in premature babies in the blue light part of the spectrum. Other parts of color therapy use monochromatic light. That's 9 angstroms thick, so it's very pure light, literally looking at one color of the rainbow. It's very effective, just using this for 10 minutes every 2 weeks to get rid of or change emotional blocks in people. It also directly connects to the ganglion cells in the retina and so on. So there's a lot of research on this. Medical lasers can be used in various colors on the acupuncture points, as shown on the top right. Also, they can be put intravenously, be used for treating the body directly on the teeth and so forth. So they have a lot of applications. And as you can see here, the biological effects of laser light are getting more and more introduced into modern medicine, helping with inflammation, increasing healing, stimulating cell growth and regeneration, boosting bone repair, immunity, and so forth. We also use light therapy to improve cognitive and emotional functioning. Recent neuroimaging studies have actually shown that certain wavelengths and durations of light can modulate brain responses with cognitive tasks. They can be very effective for mood disorders, oftentimes working better than drugs. Of course, they're used bright light for seasonal affective disorder in the winter in the northern countries, especially where there isn't enough sunlight. And they seem to be working better than antidepressants. Light and circadian rhythms are affecting the sleep. We know we have a circadian cycle, and the light exposure through the eyes and through the suprachiasmatic nucleus have a major effect on regulating sleep cycles. And nowadays, we have so much screen time, people watching computer screens, tablets, and so on, which give off a lot of blue light radiation, more in the blue part of the spectrum, that you can, of course, block with sort of these orange-blue blocker glasses. But this really has an effect on sleep that we're seeing, along with the problems with melatonin from electromagnetic radiation being decreased. We can also use light to treat cancer, especially if you give a photosensitizing agent. There's a number of these around, and when they're taken internally and then activating the cancer cells with LEDs that are very bright, either in the whole body or locally, then you can selectively kill off cancer cells. So that's another approach that's being used. And finally, we know that light exposure will help with electromagnetic rouleau formation. We know that a lot of times when people are exposed to excessive electromagnetic fields, the blood gets sludgy, rouleau formation happens. This also happens with eating a diet that can oftentimes cause that. And here you can see just 10 minutes of red light or low-level laser light or exposing yourself to the sun for a short time can break up that rouleau formation and increase better circulation. And it's very important that we take breaks from our computers over time. So in summary, I want to just stress that we are primarily water beings, and part of the water in our cells, being quantum coherent in these domains, make us very sensitive to electromagnetic fields. It's not just what goes outside, but also how the body resonates to it inside. And since we're electrically beings in nature, as I've shown you, I think we can use non-thermal EMFs very successfully, therapeutically, and we hope that this will offset some of the damage that's being done by the adverse electromagnetic effects from telecommunications technologies like cell phones and Wi-Fi and so forth that I'm not going to talk about today. I hope that the future of healthcare will use more electromagnetic field therapy as part of energy medicine modalities because it's very cost effective and can be giving great public benefit. And never forget that electromagnetic fields are very frequency specific and power specific, so more is not always better in this kind of medicine. Even low-level effects like we see from our devices can really affect the body significantly. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to talking with you during the question and answer period.